The great hall of the Galactic Council fell silent as Thex Malar walked slowly to the witness stand. His 4 legs moved carefully across the polished floor. Scars covered his gray skin where plasma burns had never fully healed. One of his 3 eyes was clouded white from an old injury. The assembled delegates from dozens of worlds watched him with mixed feelings of curiosity and fear. Thex Malar was the last living officer from the 47th Vectari fleet. 50 years had passed since the human Vectari War ended. 50 years since his mighty empire fell to a species that barely knew how to travel between stars. Today, he would tell the Council what really happened during those 18 months of hell. The Chief Arbiter, a tall being with blue skin and silver robes, spoke first. Witness Thex Malar, you served as battle commander in the 47th Vectari fleet during the conflict with the human species. Is this correct? Yes, Thex Malar replied. His voice was rough from years of trying to forget what he had seen. I was there from the first battle to the last surrender. The Council has called this tribunal to understand how the Vectari Empire, with superior technology and 1,000 years of military experience, was defeated so completely by humanity. We need to know if humans committed war crimes during this conflict. Thex Malar's remaining good eye fixed on the Chief Arbiter. War crimes? You want to know about war crimes? He let out a sound that might have been laughter if it had not been so bitter. The humans did nothing against galactic law. That is what made them so terrifying. Murmurs spread through the hall. Many delegates had heard stories about human brutality. Tales of savage fighters who showed no mercy and fought like wild beasts. But Thex Malar was saying something different. Before I begin my testimony, Thex Malar continued, the Council must understand something important. The humans we fought were not their best warriors. They were not even their regular military. Most were farmers, miners, and colonists who had never seen war before. Earth itself never sent its main forces to fight us. The hall grew even quieter. This was not what anyone expected to hear. I have studied human military history since the war ended, Thex Malar said. I needed to understand what defeated us. Humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years on their home planet. They have perfected the art of killing in ways we cannot imagine. But the humans we faced were just ordinary people protecting their homes. A delegate from the Zoranian Empire stood up. If they were just colonists, how did they defeat your fleets? Your people had conquered 47 star systems before meeting humanity. Thex Malar turned to look at the Zoranian. That is exactly the question this tribunal needs answered. We made the same mistake you are making right now. We thought numbers and technology would win the war. We thought humans would fight like every other species we had conquered. We were wrong about everything. The Chief Arbiter leaned forward. Please tell the Council what happened. Start from the beginning. Thex Malar closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, the delegates could see old pain there. To understand what humans did to us, you must first understand what we were before we met them. The Vectari Empire was the strongest military force in this part of the galaxy. Our plasma weapons could cut through any armor. Our energy shields could stop any attack. Our ships were faster and more powerful than anything other species could build. He paused and looked around the hall. We had a simple way of conquering new worlds. First, we would destroy their orbital defenses. Then we would land our armies and crush any resistance. Most species would surrender after losing a few battles. Those who did not surrender would be completely destroyed. This method worked for 800 years. And you expected it to work against humans as well? asked the chief arbiter. Of course we did. When our scouts first found human colonies, we laughed at what we saw. They were using chemical rockets to move between planets. Their weapons still fired metal bullets instead of energy beams. Their ships had no shields and thin metal hulls. Admiral Zeftor, our fleet commander, said conquering them would take less than 1 month. Thexmalar's voice grew darker. We studied their colonies for several weeks before attacking. The humans seemed to spend most of their time growing food and digging mines. They had small defense forces with simple weapons. Their largest warship was smaller than our scout vessels. Everything we saw told us this would be an easy victory. But something was different about them, he continued. Our intelligence officers noticed that humans responded to threats in unusual ways. When pirates attacked their trade ships, humans did not just defend themselves. They hunted down every pirate base in the sector and destroyed them all. When wild animals threatened their colonies, humans did not just kill the dangerous ones. They wiped out entire species that they saw as threats. The chief arbiter made a note on his datapad. Did this concern your commanders? No, Thexmalar admitted. We thought it showed that humans were primitive and savage. We believed their violent nature would make them easy to defeat. Savage species usually fight without discipline or planning. They charge at superior forces and get themselves killed. Quickly. We sent our first diplomatic contact to the main human colony in the Kepler system. The human negotiator was a man named Kang Dae-ho. He was polite and spoke our language well. He offered to discuss peaceful trade agreements and territorial boundaries. Thexmalar shook his head slowly. Admiral Zeftor refused to negotiate. He told Kang Dae-ho that humans had 3 days to evacuate all their colonies in sectors 7 through 12. After that, any humans found in those areas would be considered enemy combatants. How did the human respond? Asked a delegate. Kang Dae-ho was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that should have warned us what was coming. He said, "You do not understand what you are starting. Humans are not like other species you have conquered. We do not surrender our homes. We do not run from fights. If you attack us, we will respond with everything we have." Admiral Zeftor laughed at this threat. He told Kang Dae-ho that the Vektari Empire had never lost a war. He said human technology was too primitive to pose any danger to our forces. Thexmalar's good eye grew distant as he remembered that moment. Kang Dae-ho nodded slowly. Then he said something that I still remember exactly. "We have been fighting and killing each other for 10,000 years on our home world. We know every possible way to destroy an enemy. If you force us to fight, we will show you things you have never imagined." The Admiral ordered Kang Dae-ho to leave. As the human was walking away, he turned back one more time. He looked directly at me and said, "Tell your families you love them while you still can." The hall was completely silent now. Every delegate was listening carefully to Thexmalar's words. 3 days later, we attacked the human colonies at Kepler Station, Proxima Base, and New Sol simultaneously. We expected quick victories at all 3 locations. We planned to destroy their orbital defenses, land our troops, and accept their surrender before the day was over. Thexmalar looked around the hall one more time. That was 50 years ago. I am the only Vektari officer from those 3 battles who is still alive. What happened in those first hours of fighting changed everything we thought we knew about war. The chief arbiter waited for him to continue. "Tomorrow I will tell you about the first battle," Thexmalar said. "I will explain how humans turned our strength against us and made us afraid of our own shadows. But understand this before I continue. Everything that happened afterward was our own fault. We could have stopped the war at any time by simply leaving human space. We chose to keep fighting because we could not believe what was happening to us. The humans never wanted to conquer us. They only wanted us to leave them alone. When we refused to do that, they taught us why that was a mistake. Thex Mala returned to the witness stand the next day. The Great Hall was even more crowded than before. Word had spread throughout the galactic community about his testimony. Representatives from dozens of species wanted to hear what had really happened during the human-Vectari War. The Chief Arbiter called the session to order. Witness Thex Malar, yesterday you told us about the diplomatic contact before the war began. Today, please tell us about the first battle. Thex Malar nodded slowly. The first battle was at Kepler Station. It was supposed to be the easiest target. Our intelligence reports said it was mainly a mining colony with light defenses. We sent the 23rd Attack Squadron to destroy their orbital platforms and force a surrender. He paused and stared at his hands. I was aboard the flagship with Squadron Commander Velthar. We had 12 heavy cruisers and 36 fighter craft. The humans had 4 small defense stations and maybe 20 patrol ships. Our weapons could destroy their entire fleet in minutes. What happened when you arrived? Asked the Chief Arbiter. At first, everything went according to plan. We dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system and began our attack approach. The human defense stations powered up their weapons and moved to intercept us. Their patrol ships formed a defensive line between us and the colony. Thex Malar's expression grew troubled. But something was wrong from the very beginning. Our long-range sensors detected movement throughout the system. Civilian ships were not fleeing toward the outer planets like refugees usually do. Instead, they were moving toward us. Commander Velthar ordered a communications scan. We expected to hear panic and confusion from the human civilians. Instead, we heard calm, organized voices giving military commands. The humans were coordinating their response like a professional military force. A delegate from the Altarian Confederation interrupted. Were they using military communication codes? No, Thex Malar replied. They were speaking in plain language that we could easily understand. But the way they talked was different from any civilian population we had encountered before. There was no fear in their voices, no begging for mercy. They were discussing how to kill us as calmly as they might talk about the weather. We heard one transmission that made Commander Velthar pause. A human woman named Park So-min was coordinating the defense. She said, "All civilian vessels, this is Admiral Park. Execute Defensive Pattern 7. Remember, these invaders chose to attack our homes. Show them what that means." Thex Malar looked directly at the Chief Arbiter. Admiral Park was not a military officer. Our intelligence files said she was a mining engineer who organized the colony's transportation network, but she was giving orders like someone who had planned for this exact situation. "Did this concern your commander?" asked the Chief Arbiter. Commander Velthar was confident in our superior firepower. He ordered the attack to proceed. Our plasma cannons began firing at the human defense stations from maximum range. Our shields were raised to full power. Everything was going exactly as it had in dozens of previous campaigns. Thex Malar closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The first hint that something was wrong came when our plasma bolts hit the human stations. Instead of exploding, they absorbed the energy and redirected it. The humans had somehow modified their stations to use our own weapons against us. "But that was impossible," protested a delegate. "Plasma energy cannot be redirected without sophisticated deflector arrays." "That is what we thought too," Thex Malar replied. But the humans had figured out how to do it using simple magnetic fields and metal plates. Their stations were surrounded by what looked like scrap metal and mining equipment. We thought it was just poor construction. We were wrong. The human defense stations began firing back with kinetic weapons, metal slugs, traveling at enormous speed. Our shields stopped them easily, but then something unexpected happened. The humans kept firing round after round without stopping. Thex Mallar's voice grew quieter. We had never faced an enemy that could maintain continuous fire for more than a few minutes. Energy weapons require time to recharge, but kinetic weapons can fire as long as you have ammunition. And the humans seemed to have unlimited amounts of ammunition. Our shields began to overload from the constant impacts. Each metal slug was weak individually, but hundreds of them hitting our ships every second began to drain our power systems. Commander Velthar ordered us to close range for a quick finishing attack. That was when the human civilians joined the battle. Mining ships, cargo haulers, and passenger transports began accelerating toward our fleet. At first, we thought they were trying to escape. Then we realized they were attacking us. The hall erupted in surprised murmurs. Using civilian ships as weapons violated every galactic convention of warfare. The human civilian ships had been modified, Thex Mallar continued. They had attached mining charges and industrial explosives to their hulls. They were turning themselves into guided missiles aimed at our fleet. Commander Velthar ordered our fighters to destroy the civilian ships before they could reach us. But there were too many of them coming from too many directions, and the humans were flying them in ways we had never seen before. Thex Mallar stood up from the witness chair and began pacing. A normal species uses civilian ships to carry people and cargo. They fly carefully and avoid dangerous maneuvers, but the humans were flying their ships like weapons. They used mining explosives to change direction at the last second. They rammed our fighters head-on, destroying both ships. One human pilot, a man named Kim Tae-jun, crashed his cargo hauler into our flagship's shield generator. The explosion knocked out half our defensive systems. As his ship was breaking apart, we heard him on the radio laughing and saying, "See you in hell, you bastards!" The delegates looked shocked. Suicidal attacks were almost unknown in galactic warfare. But the worst part was not the damage they caused, Thex Mallar said. It was how organized they were. Every civilian ship that attacked us was piloted by volunteers. We intercepted their communications and heard families saying goodbye to each other, fathers telling their children to be brave, mothers promising to make the invaders pay for threatening their homes. These were not trained soldiers. They were ordinary people who had decided to die rather than let us take their colony. And they were happy to do it. Thex Mallar sat back down heavily. The battle lasted 6 hours. We destroyed all 4 human defense stations and shot down most of their patrol ships. But we lost 8 cruisers and 22 fighters. The humans had no chance of winning, but they made us pay a terrible price for our victory. When the fighting was over, we expected the survivors to surrender. Instead, Admiral Park sent us a message. She said, "You have taken our orbital defenses, but Kepler Station is still ours. If you want it, come and take it. We will be waiting." Commander Velthar was furious. He had expected to accept a surrender hours ago. Instead, he was faced with landing troops on a hostile planet where the defenders had already shown they would rather die than submit. Thex Mallar looked around the hall. That was our first lesson about humans. They do not fight to win battles. They fight to make attacking them so costly that their enemies will stop trying. Even when they lose, they make sure their enemies suffer. The orbital battle at Kepler Station was supposed to last 2 hours and cost us maybe 1 or 2 ships. Instead, it took all day and destroyed 1/3 of our squadron. And we still had to fight for the colony itself. That night, As we prepared for the ground assault, Commander Velthar sent a message to Admiral Zeftor. He requested reinforcements and asked permission to use orbital bombardment to destroy the colony from space. Admiral Zeftor refused. He said the Vectari Empire did not destroy valuable colonies when they could be captured intact. He ordered us to proceed with the ground assault as planned. Thexmalar's good eye fixed on the Chief Arbiter. That decision doomed the 23rd Attack Squadron. If we had simply destroyed Kepler Station from orbit and left, thousands of my comrades would still be alive today. But we had too much pride to retreat, and too much greed to destroy what we wanted to take. The humans were counting on exactly that reaction. The third day of testimony began with Thexmalar looking even more tired than before. The delegates noticed that his hands shook slightly as he took his place at the witness stand. The Chief Arbiter had to call for order several times as excited. Conversations filled the hall. Witness Thexmalar, yesterday you described the orbital battle at Kepler Station. Please tell us what happened during the ground assault. Thexmalar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. The ground assault was where we learned that humans do not fight like any other species in the galaxy. Everything we thought we knew about warfare became useless. Commander Velthar sent down our first wave of troops at dawn. 2,000 Vectari soldiers in full combat armor, supported by hover tanks and plasma artillery. We had overwhelming firepower advantage. The humans had maybe 500 defenders with kinetic weapons and improvised explosives. The landing zone was a flat area near the main colony buildings. Our tactical computer said it was perfect for deploying our forces. We could establish a secure perimeter and advance methodically toward the colony center. Thexmalar shook his head slowly. But the humans had prepared for us. They had spent the night digging tunnels under the landing zone. When our troops touched down, the ground underneath them exploded. A delegate gasped. They mined their own land. Not just mined, Thexmalar replied. They had connected mining charges to create a network of underground explosions. When our first transport landed, humans hiding in the tunnels detonated charges directly under our soldiers. Entire squads vanished in clouds of dirt and fire. But that was only the beginning. As our survivors tried to regroup, human defenders began attacking from positions we had not detected. They were hiding in fake rocks, buried bunkers, and camouflaged. Holes in the ground. Thexmalar stood up and began pacing again. The human commander was a woman named General Kim Tae-jun. We intercepted her radio transmissions during the battle. She was not giving orders like a normal military officer. Instead, she was encouraging her troops like they were her own children. I remember one transmission clearly. A human soldier reported that his position was being overrun and requested permission to retreat. General Kim told him, "Hold your ground, Dongwu. Your family is counting on you. Make every shot count, then fall back to position 3 when your ammunition runs low." That human soldier, Dongwu, held his position against 20 Vectari troops for 40 minutes. When he finally ran out of bullets, he used mining explosives to collapse a tunnel entrance, trapping our soldiers underground. He died in the explosion, but he saved the lives of human civilians hiding behind his position. The Chief Arbiter made notes on his datapad. Were all human defenders fighting with such determination? Every single one, Thexmalar replied. We had fought dozens of species before humans. Usually when defenders start taking heavy casualties, some of them break and run. Fear spreads through their ranks and their resistance collapses. But human fear worked differently. Instead of making them run away, it made them fight harder. We could hear their radio transmissions. When they reported casualties, they did not sound discouraged. They sounded angry. I heard one human woman, named Lee Hana, coordinating a defense position. When enemy fire killed 2 of her soldiers, she said, "Those bastards just killed Minho and Jae Sung. Make them pay for it." Her troops responded by fighting even more fiercely. Thex Malar stopped pacing and faced the assembled delegates. "Do you understand what this means? Human soldiers become more dangerous when their friends are killed, not less dangerous. Every casualty we inflicted made the survivors fight harder. Our troops began to notice this pattern. Veteran Vectari soldiers started to become afraid. They had never faced an enemy that got stronger as the battle continued. Usually, a long fight favors the side with better equipment and training. But humans seemed to gain energy from combat itself. The battle for the main colony buildings lasted 3 days. We had to fight for every room and corridor. Humans had prepared defensive positions everywhere. They used furniture as barricades, turned kitchen equipment into weapons, and booby-trapped doors and windows. Commander Velthar ordered our forces to use plasma weapons to clear buildings quickly, but the humans adapted to this tactic. They began fighting from positions where using plasma weapons would damage valuable equipment or cause explosions that would hurt our own troops. A delegate asked, "Did they use human shields or other illegal tactics?" Thex Malar looked puzzled. "Human shields? They were all human shields. Every defender was protecting civilians hiding behind them, but they never used civilians as weapons or put them in deliberate danger. If anything, human soldiers took greater risks to keep non-combatants safe. I saw human soldiers charge directly at our plasma cannons to draw fire away from areas where children were hiding. A man named Choi Hyejin led a squad that held a school building for 18 hours while families evacuated through underground tunnels. When Choi Hyejin finally ran out of ammunition, he used a fire extinguisher and metal chairs to fight our soldiers in hand-to-hand combat. He was killed, but he gave the last civilians time to escape." Thex Malar sat down heavily. By the 3rd day, our forces had captured most of the colony. We controlled the power station, the communication center, and the main administrative buildings. Commander Velthar prepared to accept the human surrender. But General Kim sent us a message that shocked everyone. She said, "You can have the buildings. We do not need them anymore. The real battle is just beginning." That night, the humans began their counterattack. But it was not like any counterattack we had ever seen. Instead of trying to retake the buildings we had captured, they began attacking our supply lines and reinforcement ships still in orbit. Human soldiers, who had supposedly been defeated, emerged from hidden positions throughout the colony. They had been hiding in sewers, storage rooms, and underground maintenance tunnels. While we were focused on capturing buildings, they had been preparing to cut us off from our support. Thex Malar's voice grew darker. We discovered that many of the humans we thought we had killed were still alive. They had been using fake blood and acting wounded to make us think they were out of the fight. When our troops moved past their positions, these dead humans attacked from behind. A woman named Major Odong Min led a team that had been pretending to be casualties for 2 days. When our guards relaxed, her team seized control of our communications equipment and began broadcasting false orders to our scattered forces. Meanwhile, other human teams were attacking our landing ships with improvised rockets made from mining equipment. They destroyed 4 transport vessels and damaged our main supply depot. The hall was completely silent as delegates absorbed this information. By dawn of the 4th day, we realized we were trapped. The colony buildings we had captured were surrounded by human forces. Our orbital support was under constant attack. and we were running low on ammunition because our supply lines had been cut. Commander Velthar sent an urgent message to Admiral Zeftor requesting immediate evacuation. But the Admiral ordered us to hold our positions and wait for reinforcements. Thex Malar looked directly at the Chief Arbiter. Those reinforcements never came. The humans had somehow managed to attack our other target colonies at the same time. Admiral Zeftor was dealing with similar disasters at Proxima Base and New Sol. We were on our own, surrounded by an enemy that refused to admit they had been defeated. And we were beginning to understand that humans do not think about victory and defeat the same way other species do. For humans, losing a battle is just the beginning of the war. On the 8th and final day, Thex Malar entered the hall with a strange sense of peace about him. The trembling was gone, replaced by the calm of someone who had finally shared a burden he had carried for 50 years. The assembled delegates waited in complete silence as he took his place at the witness stand for the last time. "Witness Thex Malar," the Chief Arbiter said solemnly. "Today you will conclude your testimony about the human-Vectari War. The Council is particularly interested in your assessment of what this conflict means for future galactic relations." Thex Malar nodded and looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of delegates from dozens of worlds. "I have spent 50 years trying to understand what happened during those 18 months of war. Today I will share what I have learned and why every species in this galaxy should listen carefully to my words." When the war ended, I was taken to a human prisoner of war facility on Earth. I expected to be interrogated, studied, perhaps used as a bargaining chip in peace negotiations. Instead, I was treated as an honored guest. The facility was not a prison, but a research center where human scholars were trying to understand Vectari culture. They wanted to learn our language, our history, our art, and our philosophy. They were genuinely curious about us as people, not just as former enemies. A human anthropologist named Dr. Lee Soo-young spent months interviewing me about Vectari society. She was not gathering military intelligence. She was trying to understand how our two species could coexist peacefully in the future. Thex Malar stood and walked to the center of the hall. Dr. Lee asked me a question that changed how I thought about everything. "Thex Malar, why did your people choose to invade human space instead of simply asking for what you needed?" I told her that conquest was the Vectari way. We had always taken what we wanted from weaker species. The concept of asking for permission or negotiating agreements was foreign to our culture. Dr. Lee looked sad when I said this. She told me, "If your people had simply asked for mineral rights or trading partnerships, we would have gladly negotiated. Humans prefer cooperation to conflict. But when you attacked our families, you forced us to respond as warriors instead of neighbors." That conversation made me realize the fundamental mistake we had made. We assumed humans would react to invasion the same way other species had, with fear, desperation, and eventual submission. But humans responded as predators whose territory had been invaded by competitors. A delegate asked, "Did you come to understand why humans were so effective in combat?" "Yes," Thex Malar replied. "And the answer is more disturbing than you might expect. Humans were effective because war is their natural state. Peace is what they have to work at. During my time on Earth, I observed human society carefully. I watched their entertainment, studied their history, and listened to their conversations. What I discovered was a species that had been refining warfare for thousands of generations. Human children play games that simulate combat and strategy. Human sports are stylized forms of hunting and fighting. Human entertainment celebrates warriors, tacticians, and survivors. Their entire culture is built around the concept of struggle and victory. Thex Malar's voice grew more serious. But here is what makes humans truly dangerous. They have learned to channel their warrior instincts through organized society. They can cooperate on massive scales while maintaining individual competitive drives. A human military unit fights like a pack of predators, but each member is also capable of independent thought and action. When human commanders are killed, their subordinates continue fighting effectively. When human plans fail, individual soldiers adapt and improvise new strategies. This combination of cooperation and independence makes human forces incredibly resilient. You cannot break their command structure because every human is potentially a leader. You cannot predict their tactics because every human is potentially a strategist. The chief arbiter leaned forward. Are you saying that all humans are natural warriors? I am saying that all humans are natural survivors, Thex Malar corrected. And survival, when threatened, becomes warfare. What we faced during our invasion was not a military force, but an entire species that had decided we were a threat to their survival. The human soldiers I fought were farmers, engineers, teachers, and parents who had been forced to become warriors. But they were very, very good at it because their culture had been preparing them for this moment their entire lives. Thex Malar returned to the witness stand. After 6 months on Earth, I was given a choice. I could return to Vectari space, or I could remain on Earth as a cultural exchange representative. I chose to stay. I have lived among humans for 49 years now. I have watched their children grow up, seen their families celebrate and mourn, observed their daily struggles and triumphs. What I learned has convinced me that the human Vectari War was not an aberration. It was a demonstration. Humans showed the galaxy exactly what they are capable of when threatened. But they also showed remarkable restraint. They could have destroyed the Vectari Empire completely, but they chose not to. They could have pursued retreating Vectari forces to our home worlds, but they stopped at their own borders. The human leadership made a deliberate decision to end the war as soon as their territory was secure. They were not interested in conquest or revenge. They simply wanted to be left alone. A delegate from the Zoranian Empire stood up. What is your assessment of the current threat level humanity poses to galactic civilization? Thex Malar was quiet for a long moment before answering. Humans pose no threat to species that leave them in peace, but they represent an existential danger to any civilization that attacks them or their allies. During my time on Earth, I learned that the forces we fought were primarily colonial militia and newly trained volunteers. Earth's regular military, never fully mobilized for the war. The planetary defense forces never left their home systems. The elite units that humans use for their most difficult operations never engaged Vectari forces. Human Ambassador Lee Su-young recently informed the Galactic Council that humanity considers the Vectari conflict to be a minor border skirmish in their military records. They classify it as a training exercise that got out of hand. The hall erupted in shocked murmurs and concerned conversations. But here is what the Council must understand, Thex Malar continued, raising his voice to be heard over the noise. Humans do not want to conquer the galaxy. They are not interested in building an empire or subjugating other species. They want to explore, trade, learn, and build relationships with their neighbors. However, they will respond to aggression with overwhelming force. And their definition of aggression includes threats to their allies, attacks on civilian populations, and attempts to restrict their freedom of movement and exploration. The Chief Arbiter called for order. What specific recommendations do you have for the Council? Thex Malor stood for the final time. I recommend that the Galactic Council formally recognize humanity as an apex military species and establish protocols for interaction that respect their territorial sovereignty and cultural independence. I recommend that any species considering hostile action against human interests should study the historical records of this war carefully and reconsider their plans. I recommend that the Council invite human representatives to participate in galactic governance as equals, not as junior members who must prove themselves worthy of respect. And most importantly, I recommend that we learn from the example humans have set. They showed us that it is possible to be overwhelmingly powerful without being unnecessarily cruel. They demonstrated how to win a war completely while maintaining moral principles. Thex Malor looked around the hall one final time. You asked me to testify about human war crimes during the conflict with my people. I have found no evidence of such crimes. Every human action was methodical, proportional, and designed to end the conflict as quickly as possible while minimizing casualties on both sides. The real crime would be forcing humanity to demonstrate their capabilities again. We survived because they chose to accept our surrender and treat us with dignity. Other species who make the same mistake we made may not be so fortunate. Humans gave us a choice: live in peace as neighbors, or be defeated as enemies. We chose war and learned why that was a mistake. I pray that other species will be wiser than we were. The Chief Arbiter nodded slowly. Thank you, Witness Thex Malor. Your testimony has been invaluable to the Council's understanding of this conflict. As Thex Malor left the witness stand, the assembled delegates sat in stunned silence. The implications of his testimony would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. Humanity had announced their presence in the galaxy, not with speeches or diplomacy, but with a demonstration of military capability that could not be ignored or forgotten. The age of human isolation was over. The age of human inclusion in galactic civilization was about to begin, whether the galaxy was ready for it or not. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Council voted unanimously to extend full membership to humanity and establish Earth as a major diplomatic center. The human-Vectari War had ended 50 years earlier, but its consequences were just beginning to shape the future of interstellar civilization. On the fifth day, Thex Malor looked different. The delegates noticed that his movements were more nervous, and he kept glancing around the hall as if expecting something to attack him. The trauma of his memories was becoming more apparent with each day of testimony. Witness Thex Malor, the Chief Arbiter said gently, are you able to continue your testimony today? Thex Malor straightened in his chair. Yes. Today I must tell you about how humans hunt their enemies. This is the part of the war that broke the minds of many Vectari soldiers. We discovered that humans do not just fight battles. They hunt their opponents like predators stalking prey. After 2 months of fighting, Admiral Zeftor decided to change our strategy. Instead of trying to capture human colonies, we would destroy their supply lines and force them to surrender. We began attacking human transport ships and supply stations throughout their territory. This tactic had always worked against other species. Cut off their supplies and reinforcements, and they become unable to continue fighting. But humans responded to our new strategy in a way we had never experienced before. Thexmalar stood and began his usual pacing. Human forces, led by a man named Major Odong Min, began what they called pack hunting. They would coordinate attacks across multiple star systems simultaneously, hitting our supply lines in return. But human pack hunting was different from anything we had seen in galactic warfare. When most species attack supply lines, they target the largest, most valuable shipments. Humans attacked everything. Small scout ships, repair vessels, even individual soldiers traveling between bases. Major O's teams seemed to know exactly where our ships would be and when they would be there. They began ambushing our convoys with perfect timing and overwhelming force. A delegate interrupted. How could they predict your movements so accurately? We did not understand it at first, Thexmalar replied. But we eventually discovered that humans had been studying our patterns for months. They tracked how we scheduled supply runs, how we chose travel routes, even how individual commanders made decisions. A human intelligence officer named Lieutenant Colonel Choi Hye-jin had created detailed profiles of every Vectari officer. She could predict what each commander would do in specific situations with frightening accuracy. But the truly terrifying part was how humans coordinated their attacks. While we were fighting Major O's team in one system, other human forces would be attacking our bases 3 systems away. They were operating like a pack of hunters driving prey into traps. Thexmalar stopped pacing and faced the delegates directly. Humans had turned the entire war zone into their hunting ground. Every Vectari ship that entered human space was tracked from the moment it arrived. Every base we established was under constant surveillance. We could not move anywhere without humans knowing about it. Our communications began intercepting strange human transmissions. Instead of military orders, we heard humans sharing information like hunters discussing prey. They would report Vectari ship movements, discuss weak points in our defenses, and coordinate attacks with casual efficiency. I remember one transmission that made our intelligence officers very nervous. A human woman named Commander Park Min-seok was talking to her teams about a planned attack on our supply depot. She said, "The Vectari will try to reinforce the depot when we attack. Jamin's team will be waiting at coordinates 77 Alpha to ambush the reinforcements. Dongwu's team will hit their communications relay to prevent them from calling for help." What frightened us was not the content of the message, but the tone. Commander Park was discussing our destruction as calmly as she might plan a family dinner. There was no anger, no hatred, just professional interest in killing us efficiently. The Chief Arbiter looked disturbed. Were humans showing no emotion about the war? That is what we thought at first, Thexmalar replied. But we were wrong. Humans were showing emotion, just not the emotions we expected. They were not angry or afraid. They were excited. We began intercepting personal communications between human soldiers. They talked about the war like it was the most interesting challenge they had ever faced. A human pilot named Major Nam Soo-jin sent a message to her family saying, "These Vectari are good opponents. They make us work for every victory. I have never felt so alive." Our psychologists tried to analyze these communications. They concluded that humans were experiencing something called combat high, a state where fighting becomes addictive and enjoyable. But this analysis only made our situation worse. Thexmalar sat down heavily. An enemy that enjoys fighting? You is far more dangerous than an enemy that fears or hates you. Fear and hatred can be overcome. But how do you defeat an opponent who becomes stronger and happier the longer the fight continues? Human pack hunting tactics began to evolve rapidly. They started using what they called persistence hunting, following our ships across multiple Star systems, attacking repeatedly until our crews were exhausted and our equipment was damaged. A human squadron led by Captain Kwon Young-soo followed one of our heavy cruisers for 6 days, attacking every few hours with small strikes. They never tried to destroy the ship directly. Instead, they wore down its defenses gradually. By the time the Vektari cruiser reached our nearest base, its shields were failing, its weapons were overheated, and its crew was near collapse from lack of sleep. The humans had not destroyed the ship, but they had made it completely useless for combat. Worse, our other ships were afraid to help. Every time we sent reinforcements, human pack hunters would attack them too. Soon we had multiple ships being hunted simultaneously across dozens of star systems. A delegate asked, "Did you develop counter-tactics to deal with this hunting strategy?" Thexmalar made a sound that might have been bitter laughter. "We tried everything. We varied our routes randomly. We used false communications to mislead them. We even sent out decoy ships to draw their attacks. Nothing worked. The humans adapted to every change we made. When we used random routes, they stationed hunters along all possible paths. When we sent false communications, they learned to identify real intelligence from fake information. When we used decoys, they somehow knew which ships were real targets. A human officer named Colonel Bae Min-jung sent us a message that explained why our counter-tactics were failing. She said, "You are thinking like prey trying to escape predators. But we are not just predators, we are persistence hunters. The more you run, the more information you give us about how you think." That was when we realized the horrible truth. Every attempt to escape from human hunters was teaching them more about us. Every tactic we used was being studied and countered. We were not fighting an enemy. We were training them to hunt us more effectively. Thexmalar's good eye fixed on the chief arbiter. By the end of the 3rd month, Vektari forces throughout human space were being hunted constantly. We could not resupply our bases. We could not reinforce our positions. We could not even evacuate our wounded without human pack hunters attacking our medical ships. Our soldiers began to develop what human psychologists would probably call prey mentality. They became nervous and paranoid, always watching for signs of human attack. The stress of being constantly hunted began to break down military discipline. Some Vektari units abandoned their positions without orders. Others refused to leave their bases even when commanded to advance. A few commanders requested permission to retreat to Vektari space entirely. Admiral Zeftor refused all requests for retreat. He ordered us to maintain our positions and continue fighting, but his orders became increasingly desperate and irrational. Meanwhile, the humans continued their pack hunting with methodical precision. They were not just defeating us militarily. They were breaking us psychologically, making us afraid to fight them at all. Thexmalar looked around the silent hall. "Tomorrow I will tell you about the psychological warfare humans used against us. But understand this. Everything I have described so far was just humans learning to hunt us efficiently. They had not yet begun to make us afraid." Thexmalar entered the hall on the 6th day, moving like someone who had not slept well in years. His remaining eye darted constantly toward the shadows, and his hands trembled as he took his place at the witness stand. Several delegates noticed that he flinched whenever someone moved too quickly near him. "Witness Thexmalar," the chief arbiter said carefully. "Today you are going to tell us about human psychological warfare. Are you certain you wish to continue?" Thexmalar took several deep breaths before responding. "I must continue. The galaxy needs to understand what humans are capable of when they decide to break their enemies' minds rather than just their bodies. The psychological warfare began during the 4th month of fighting. Until then, humans had been focused on tactical victories and strategic advantages. But something changed. They began targeting our minds as deliberately as they had targeted our supply lines. It started with messages. Human forces began broadcasting communications directly to our troops, but these were not surrender demands or propaganda speeches. They were detailed analyses of our tactical mistakes. Thexmalar's voice grew quieter. A human officer named Lieutenant Colonel Choi Hae-jin would broadcast tactical reviews after every battle. She would explain exactly how human forces had predicted our movements, exploited our weaknesses, and turned our own strategies against us. These broadcasts were not mocking or insulting. Lieutenant Colonel Choi spoke in a calm, professional tone, like an instructor teaching students. But the content was devastating to our troops' confidence. I remember one broadcast clearly. After we lost a supply convoy to human raiders, Lieutenant Colonel Choi explained. The Vectari commander chose Route 7 because it appeared safest on tactical displays. However, this route required 3 course corrections that followed predictable timing intervals. We positioned our forces at the 2nd correction point and waited for the convoy to arrive exactly when our calculations predicted. A delegate leaned forward. Were these broadcasts accurate? Perfectly accurate, Thexmalar replied. That was what made them so effective. Lieutenant Colonel Choi would describe our decision-making process so precisely that our own commanders began to doubt their tactical abilities. But the broadcasts served another purpose. They taught human forces throughout the war zone exactly how Vectari commanders thought. Every analysis Lieutenant Colonel Choi shared made human forces better at predicting and countering our tactics. Thexmalar stood and began his nervous pacing. The humans began playing psychological games with individual Vectari units. They would disable our ships instead of destroying them, then broadcast messages to the crews. A human commander named Major Nam Soo-jin would contact disabled Vectari ships and explain exactly how they had been defeated. She would say things like, "Your shields failed because we overloaded them with precisely timed kinetic strikes. Your weapons could not target us because we jammed your sensors with modified mining equipment. Your engines stopped working because we sabotaged your fuel supply 3 hours ago." Major Nam would then offer to rescue the stranded crews. Many Vectari soldiers accepted these offers rather than wait for their own forces to find them. The chief arbiter looked puzzled. Humans were rescuing enemy soldiers? Yes, and treating them well according to galactic conventions, Thexmalar confirmed. But this kindness was part of the psychological warfare. Rescued Vectari soldiers would return to our forces with detailed knowledge of human capabilities and tactics. These returning soldiers would tell their units about human technology, human strategies, and human attitudes. They described humans as professional, competent, and completely confident in their ability to win the war. Worse, the rescued soldiers had seen human military bases and supply operations. They reported that humans appeared to have unlimited resources and reinforcements. Whether this was true or not, the reports demoralized our troops. Thexmalar stopped pacing and gripped the witness stand. But the worst psychological weapon humans used against us was laughter. Laughter? Asked a delegate. During battles, we began hearing human soldiers laughing over their communication channels, not the cruel laughter of sadistic killers, but the genuine laughter of people enjoying themselves. A human unit led by Captain Park Min-seok was defending a communications relay against our assault forces. As our plasma fire destroyed their defensive positions, we heard Captain Park laughing and saying to her troops, "These Vectari are really trying hard today. Minho, did you see that shot? It missed you by centimeters. Jae-sung, they are focusing on your position now. Show them what we think of their aim." Thexmalar's voice began to shake. Our soldiers were fighting for their lives, using all their training and equipment to defeat human defenders, and the humans were treating it like an entertaining game. The psychological impact was devastating. How do you maintain fighting spirit against an enemy that laughs at your best efforts? How do you intimidate opponents who seem to enjoy being shot at? Our troops began to develop an irrational fear of human laughter. When they heard humans laughing during combat, many Vectari soldiers would freeze or panic. The sound meant that humans were confident, relaxed, and probably about to do something unexpected. Human psychological warfare became more sophisticated as the war continued. They began broadcasting recordings of human children playing and families having dinner. The message was clear. While Vectari soldiers were dying far from home, human families were living normal, happy lives. A delegate asked, "Were humans trying to make your soldiers homesick?" "Worse," Thexmalar replied. "They were showing us that the war was not disrupting human society at all. While we were committing our entire military to conquering human space, humans were treating our invasion as a minor inconvenience." A human broadcast from Admiral Shin Jae-wook made this point explicitly. She said, "Vectari forces, you have been fighting us for 4 months. During that time, our children have continued going to school, our farmers have continued growing food, and our families have continued celebrating holidays. You are not threatening our way of life. You are just giving our military something interesting to do." Thexmalar sat down heavily. That broadcast broke the spirit of many Vectari units. We had sacrificed everything to fight this war, but humans seemed barely affected by our invasion. The psychological pressure became unbearable. Our soldiers began having nightmares about human laughter. They would wake up screaming from dreams where humans were analyzing their failures in calm, professional voices. Some Vectari troops developed what our medical officers called human obsession syndrome. They would spend hours trying to understand how humans thought, how they planned, how they seemed to predict everything we would do. These obsessed soldiers became useless for combat. They were too busy trying to think like humans to follow their own military training. A few Vectari units actually requested to be assigned to other fronts, away from human space. They claimed they could not continue fighting an enemy that had gotten inside their heads. Thexmalar looked directly at the chief arbiter. But the final psychological blow came when we intercepted a human military communication that changed everything we thought we knew about the war. "What was this communication?" asked the chief arbiter. "A message from Human Fleet Admiral Lee Soo-young to Earth Command. She was requesting permission to end the war quickly because her forces were getting bored with fighting us." The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. The message said, "Earth Command, our forces have completely adapted to Vectari tactics. The enemy no longer provides sufficient challenge for training purposes. Request permission to conclude this engagement, so we can return to more interesting military exercises." Thexmalar's good eye stared into the distance. We realized that humans had never considered us a serious threat. To them, our invasion was just a training exercise that had gone on too long. That was when Admiral Zeftor finally understood what we were really fighting. Not a desperate species defending their homes, but a military force that was studying us like laboratory specimens. and they had learned everything they needed to know. Thexmuller appeared calmer on the seventh day, but there was something different about his demeanor. The shaking had stopped, replaced by the stillness of someone who had accepted terrible truths. The delegates sensed that today's testimony would be the most difficult to hear. Witness Thexmuller, the chief arbiter began. Yesterday you described the psychological warfare humans used against your forces. Today, please tell us about the final phase of the war. Thexmuller nodded slowly. The final phase began when humans stopped playing defensive games and decided to end the conflict. What happened next showed us the difference between humans learning to fight and humans fighting to win. Admiral Zeftor had become increasingly desperate. Our forces were scattered across human space, constantly hunted, psychologically broken, and unable to achieve any strategic objectives. He made the decision to concentrate all remaining Vectari forces for one massive assault on the human home system. The plan was to bypass human defensive positions and strike directly at their core worlds. If we could capture or destroy their home planets, we could force a negotiated settlement that would allow our remaining forces to withdraw with some dignity. Thexmuller stood and walked to the center of the hall. Admiral Zeftor assembled, the largest Vectari fleet ever deployed for a single operation. 800 ships, including our most powerful battle cruisers and our elite assault units. Every surviving Vectari commander was recalled to participate in this final attack. We called it Operation Final Victory. The irony of that name would become clear later. Intelligence reports suggested that human home defenses were relatively light. Most human military forces were deployed in the outer colonies where we had been fighting. We expected to face token resistance and achieve a quick, decisive victory. A delegate asked, "Did humans attempt to negotiate when they detected your approaching fleet?" "No," Thexmuller replied. "They sent us a single message from Fleet Commander Quan Young-Su. It said, 'Welcome to our home system. We have been waiting for you.' That message should have warned us what was coming. But Admiral Zeftor interpreted it as human desperation. He believed they were trying to sound confident to hide their weakness. We were wrong about everything." Thexmuller's voice grew darker. When our fleet arrived at the edge of the human home system, we found ourselves facing something we had never encountered before. The humans had not just prepared defenses, they had turned their entire star system into a weapon. Every asteroid had been modified with thrusters and guidance systems. Mining stations had been converted into weapons platforms. Even space debris had been equipped with explosive charges and remote detonators. But the most shocking discovery was the human fleet waiting for us. We had expected maybe 50 ships defending their home worlds. Instead, we faced 300 vessels, many of them designs we had never seen before. Human engineers had spent the past months building new ships specifically designed to fight Vectari forces. These vessels incorporated everything humans had learned about our technology and tactics. A delegate leaned forward. "Were these ships superior to your own?" "Not individually," Thexmuller admitted, "but they were perfectly designed to counter our specific capabilities. Human ships had shields tuned to absorb our plasma frequencies, armor designed to deflect our kinetic weapons, and weapons that could penetrate our defenses with frightening efficiency. More importantly, human ships were coordinated by something. We had never faced artificial intelligence systems that could process tactical information faster than any organic mind. The human commander was Admiral Park Min-seok, who had been promoted from the Colonial Defense Forces. She coordinated the entire human fleet like it was a single organism. Thexmuller began pacing again. The battle began when our vanguard encountered the outer defense perimeter. Human forces did not try to stop our advance. Instead, they channeled our ships into specific approach vectors, using precisely placed obstacles and defensive fire. Admiral Zeftor believed this was a sign of human weakness. He thought they were retreating and trying to delay our advance. He ordered our full fleet to push forward aggressively. That was exactly what the humans wanted us to do. As our ships moved deeper into the system, human forces began attacking from all directions simultaneously. But these were not random raids like we had experienced before. Every attack was perfectly timed and coordinated. Human forces, led by Admiral Shin Jae-wook, used the modified asteroids as mobile weapons platforms. These asteroid bases could move to new positions faster than our sensors could track them. Meanwhile, other human units were attacking our supply ships and command vessels with precision strikes. They knew exactly which ships contained our ammunition, our fuel, and our command staff. The chief arbiter looked puzzled. How could they have such detailed intelligence about your fleet composition? Because they had been watching us assemble the fleet for weeks, Thexmalar replied. Human intelligence operatives had infiltrated Vectari space and monitored our preparations. By the time we arrived at their home system, they knew more about our fleet than we did. A human intelligence officer named Colonel Bae Min-jung had prepared detailed files on every Vectari ship and commander. She knew our tactical preferences, our psychological profiles, even our personal fears and weaknesses. During the battle, humans targeted specific ships based on this intelligence. They knew which commanders would panic under pressure, which ships had mechanical problems, which crews had low morale. Thexmalar stopped pacing and faced the delegates. But the most devastating human tactic was something they called demonstration warfare. Instead of trying to destroy our fleet quickly, they showed us exactly how helpless we were. Human forces disabled our ships rather than destroying them. They would knock out engines, weapons, and communications while leaving life support intact. Then they would broadcast detailed explanations of how they had achieved each victory. Admiral Park Min-seok personally contacted Admiral Zeftor during the battle. She said, "Admiral, your ships are now trapped in a gravity well created by our modified asteroids. Your weapons cannot penetrate our adaptive shields. Your communications are being jammed by equipment we built using your own technology. You have 3 options: surrender, die, or watch while we demonstrate more capabilities you did not know we possessed." Admiral Zeftor chose to continue fighting. That decision doomed what remained of the Vectari fleet. Human forces began displaying military capabilities we had never imagined. They used gravitational weapons to crush our battle cruisers. They employed quantum disruptors to phase our ships out of normal space. They demonstrated energy weapons that could drain our power systems completely. A delegate gasped. These technologies are far beyond anything in the galactic database. Because humans had developed them specifically for this war, Thexmalar explained. While we were fighting their colonial militia, their home worlds were building weapons designed to end the conflict permanently. But the final horror was not the advanced technology. It was the realization that humans could have used these weapons at any time during the war. They had been holding back, studying us, learning from us. Admiral Park sent one final message to our fleet. Admiral Zeftor, we have learned everything we need to know about Vectari military capabilities. This war is now concluded. Surrender your forces, and we will allow your people to return home safely. Continue fighting, and we will demonstrate why Earth has never lost a war. Thexmalar sat down heavily. Admiral Zeftor finally understood what we were really facing. Not a primitive species defending their territory, but an advanced military civilization that had been testing its capabilities against us. The surrender came 6 hours later. By then, 80% of our fleet was disabled or destroyed. The survivors were rescued by human ships and treated according to galactic conventions. But the most humbling moment came when human medical teams boarded our damaged vessels. They brought supplies, equipment, and personnel to help our wounded. Some of the humans treating our injured were the same people we had been trying to kill for months. A human doctor named Kim Tai-jun spent 18 hours performing surgery on injured Vektari soldiers. When I asked him why he was helping his enemies, he said, "The war is over. You are not enemies anymore. You are patients who need medical care." Thex Malar looked around the silent hall. That was when I finally understood what we had been fighting. Not monsters or savages, but people who could switch from total war to complete compassion in a matter of hours. Tomorrow I will conclude my testimony by explaining what this war taught us about humanity and what it means for the future of galactic civilization. On the 8th and final day, Thex Malar entered the hall with a strange sense of peace about him. The trembling was gone, replaced by the calm of someone who had finally shared a burden he had carried for 50 years. The assembled delegates waited in complete silence as he took his place at the witness stand for the last time. "Witness Thex Malar," the chief arbiter said solemnly, "today you will conclude your testimony about the human-Vektari war. The Council is particularly interested in your assessment of what this conflict means for future galactic relations." Thex Malar nodded and looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of delegates from dozens of worlds. "I have spent 50 years trying to understand what happened during those 18 months of war. Today I will share what I have learned, and why every species in this galaxy should listen carefully to my words. When the war ended, I was taken to a human prisoner of war facility on Earth. I expected to be interrogated, studied, perhaps used as a bargaining chip in peace negotiations. Instead, I was treated as an honored guest. The facility was not a prison but a research center where human scholars were trying to understand Vektari culture. They wanted to learn our language, our history, our art, and our philosophy. They were genuinely curious about us as people, not just as former enemies. A human anthropologist named Dr. Lee Soo-young spent months interviewing me about Vektari society. She was not gathering military intelligence. She was trying to understand how our two species could coexist peacefully in the future. Thex Malar stood and walked to the center of the hall. Dr. Lee asked me a question that changed how I thought about everything. "Thex Malar, why did your people choose to invade human space instead of simply asking for what you needed?" I told her that conquest was the Vektari way. We had always taken what we wanted from weaker species. The concept of asking for permission or negotiating agreements was foreign to our culture. Dr. Lee looked sad when I said this. She told me, "If your people had simply asked for mineral rights or trading partnerships, we would have gladly negotiated. Humans prefer cooperation to conflict. But when you attacked our families, you forced us to respond as warriors instead of neighbors." That conversation made me realize the fundamental mistake we had made. We assumed humans would react to invasion the same way other species had, with fear, desperation, and eventual submission. But humans responded as predators whose territory had been invaded by competitors. A delegate asked, "Did you come to understand why humans were so effective in combat?" "Yes," Thex Malar replied. "And the answer is more disturbing than you might expect. Humans were effective because war is their natural state. Peace is what they have to work at. During my time on Earth, I observed human society carefully. I watched their entertainment, studied their history, and listened to their conversations. What I discovered was a species that had been refining warfare for thousands of generations. Human children play games that simulate combat and strategy. Human sports are stylized forms of hunting and fighting. Human entertainment celebrates warriors, tacticians, and survivors. Their entire culture is built around the concept of struggle and victory. Thex Malar's voice grew more serious. But here is what makes humans truly dangerous. They have learned to channel their warrior instincts through organized society. They can cooperate on massive scales while maintaining individual competitive drives. A human military unit fights like a pack of predators, but each member is also capable of independent thought and action. When human commanders are killed, their subordinates continue fighting effectively. When human plans fail, individual soldiers adapt and improvise new strategies. This combination of cooperation and independence makes human forces incredibly resilient. You cannot break their command structure because every human is potentially a leader. You cannot predict their tactics because every human is potentially a strategist. The chief arbiter leaned forward. Are you saying that all humans are natural warriors? I am saying that all humans are natural survivors, Thex Malar corrected. And survival, when threatened, becomes warfare. What we faced during our invasion was not a military force, but an entire species that had decided we were a threat to their survival. The human soldiers I fought were farmers, engineers, teachers, and parents who had been forced to become warriors. But they were very, very good at it, because their culture had been preparing them for this moment their entire lives. Thex Malar returned to the witness stand. After 6 months on Earth, I was given a choice. I could return to Vectari space, or I could remain on Earth as a cultural exchange representative. I chose to stay. I have lived among humans for 49 years now. I have watched their children grow up, seen their families celebrate and mourn, observed their daily struggles and triumphs. What I learned has convinced me that the human Vectari War was not an aberration. It was a demonstration. Humans showed the galaxy exactly what they are capable of when threatened, but they also showed remarkable restraint. They could have destroyed the Vectari Empire completely, but they chose not to. They could have pursued retreating Vectari forces to our home worlds, but they stopped at their own borders. The human leadership made a deliberate decision to end the war as soon as their territory was secure. They were not interested in conquest or revenge. They simply wanted to be left alone. A delegate from the Zoranian Empire stood up. What is your assessment of the current threat level humanity poses to galactic civilization? Thex Malar was quiet for a long moment before answering. Humans pose no threat to species that leave them in peace, but they represent an existential danger to any civilization that attacks them or their allies. During my time on Earth, I learned that the forces we fought were primarily colonial militia and newly trained volunteers. Earth's regular military, never fully mobilized for the war. The planetary defense forces never left their home systems. The elite units that humans use for their most difficult operations never engaged Vectari forces. Human Ambassador Lee Soo-young recently informed the Galactic Council that humanity considers the Vectari conflict to be a minor border skirmish in their military records. They classify it as a training exercise that got out of hand. The hall erupted in shocked murmurs and concerned conversations. But here is what the Council must understand, Thex Malar continued, raising his voice to be heard over the noise. Humans do not want to conquer the galaxy. They are not interested in building an empire or subjugating other species. They want to explore, trade, learn, and build relationships with their neighbors. However, they will respond to aggression with overwhelming force. And their definition of aggression includes threats to their allies, attacks on civilian populations, and attempts to restrict their freedom of movement and exploration. The chief arbiter called for order. What specific recommendations do you have for the council? Thex Malar stood for the final time. I recommend that the Galactic Council formally recognize humanity as an apex military species and establish protocols for interaction that respect their territorial sovereignty and cultural independence. I recommend that any species considering hostile action against human interests should study the historical records of this war carefully and reconsider their plans. I recommend that the Council invite human representatives to participate in galactic governance as equals, not as junior members who must prove themselves worthy of respect. And most importantly, I recommend that we learn from the example humans have set. They showed us that it is possible to be overwhelmingly powerful without being unnecessarily cruel. They demonstrated how to win a war completely while maintaining moral principles. Thex Malar looked around the hall one final time. You asked me to testify about human war crimes during the conflict with my people. I have found no evidence of such crimes. Every human action was methodical, proportional, and designed to end the conflict as quickly as possible while minimizing casualties on both sides. The real crime would be forcing humanity to demonstrate their capabilities again. We survived because they chose to accept our surrender and treat us with dignity. Other species who make the same mistake we made may not be so fortunate. Humans gave us a choice: live in peace as neighbors or be defeated as enemies. We chose war and learned why that was a mistake. I pray that other species will be wiser than we were. The chief arbiter nodded slowly. Thank you, Witness Thex Malar. Your testimony has been invaluable to the Council's understanding of this conflict. As Thex Malar left the witness stand, the assembled delegates sat in stunned silence. The implications of his testimony would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. Humanity had announced their presence in the galaxy not with speeches or diplomacy, but with a demonstration of military capability that could not be ignored or forgotten. The age of human isolation was over. The age of human inclusion in galactic civilization was about to begin, whether the galaxy was ready for it or not. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Council voted unanimously to extend full membership to humanity and establish Earth as a major diplomatic center. The human-Vectari War had ended 50 years earlier, but its consequences were just beginning to shape the future of interstellar civilization.